The light in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was different today. Brighter, harsher. The spotlights hit faces so intensely it felt like one more moment and the set would start to melt. The audience filled every row, but something about their behavior was off. No casual chatter before the cameras rolled, no posters with guests' names, no explosive laughter. Everything was restrained, quiet, wary. When Tom Cruise was announced, the applause erupted automatically, but faded faster than usual, as if the crowd wasn't sure they truly wanted to clap. He walked out unhurriedly. His stride was that of someone who doesn't expect applause, confident but heavy, like a man carrying something invisible on his shoulders. He didn't wave to the audience, didn't search for the cameras, didn't make a single unnecessary gesture. He crossed the stage and sat across from Kimmel. There was no showmanship in his movements, only weight, only focus. Kimmel, with his usual polished charm, greeted him with a smile. A light joke about how Tom still does all his own stunts. The audience reacted, but awkwardly, as if suddenly remembering that laughter might be out of place here. Tom sat silently. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked. His gaze was direct and heavy. The gaze of a man who wasn't here to play a game. Kimmel didn't falter. He launched into a brief monologue about Cruise's achievements, his enduring success, how many generations grew up on his films. Another joke, something about Tom probably having a secret recipe for eternal youth. Another weak ripple of laughter from the crowd. Tom didn't take the bait. He only said, curtly, "Youth isn't about appearance." His voice was low, gravelly, the kind that hits you in the chest. The audience froze. Kimmel tensed slightly, but pressed on. He pivoted to the film Tom was there to promote. A new project. A story about a man trying to find himself after years of isolation. A drama about coming home, to a world that no longer waits for you. Tom spoke about the film calmly. His words were direct, free of promotional cliches. He talked about lost people, about silence that grows louder than words, about pain you can do nothing with but carry. Kimmel listened, nodding at the right moments, but his eyes darted. He was searching for a foothold, a moment to bring back the format, lightness, laughter, jokes. But in this studio today, the format wasn't working. He took a risk. With a smile, but a hint of strain, Kimmel asked, "Don't you think your character, well, let's say, embodies that toxic masculinity everyone's talking about these days?" The room went still. Tom turned his head toward Kimmel. Slowly, very slowly. He looked at the host for a long time, calmly, without anger, and answered, "Maybe the problem isn't with the characters. Maybe the problem is that people no longer want to let them exist." The studio grew so quiet you could hear someone in the third row crumple their program. Kimmel blinked. He tried to diffuse the moment, joking that things were getting too serious and they needed a bartender on stage. A few people in the audience attempted to laugh, but the laughter sounded like the creak of a taut rope. Tom didn't react. He sat like a rock. Kimmel moved to the next question, about a scene in the film where the character burns photos from his past. Wasn't that a symbol of rejecting old values? Of a past that no longer matters? Tom, without shifting his posture, said, "You don't throw away the past. You throw away the illusion that it will protect you." The words fell into the silence like a stone into a deep well. Kimmel tried to push forward. He brought up funny stories from the set, tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, anecdotes, silly moments. But every time, Tom stopped those attempts with short, heavy phrases that knocked the breath out of the entire studio. The audience stopped trying to laugh. The people in the room sat as if before a trial, not an entertainment show. In the control room, the director gestured frantically. Assistants exchanged nervous glances. Less than a minute remained until the commercial break. but no one knew how to transition to it without shattering the tension hanging over the entire room. Kimmel glanced at his cue cards, then looked up at Tom, and saw in his eyes not anger, not offense, but a deep, inevitable weariness. That weariness was more terrifying than any aggression. The pause stretched. For a few moments, it was as if time stopped in the studio. Kimmel smiled, too wide, too unnatural, and announced they'd be back after a short break. The applause was tepid. The audience clapped because that's what you do. But every person in the room understood. Something important had already begun, and there was no going back. When the show returned from the commercial break, a cautious silence hung over the studio. The applause sounded, but it was brief, more out of habit than genuine enthusiasm. The cameras glided slowly across the audience, as if searching for safe shots, careful not to touch the thick tension in the air. Kimmel returned to his seat, trying to maintain his lightness, forcing a smile. He joked about how great it was to have such a stellar guest in the studio and how tonight was a special evening. But his voice sounded slightly more strained than usual, and the audience could feel it. The laughter was muted, lacking the effortless ease he usually elicited. Tom Cruise sat in his place, posture unchanged. Straight back, head slightly tilted forward. He didn't look tense, more like focused, calm, like a man who knew tonight's conversation wouldn't be like the others. He didn't acknowledge the audience, didn't seek out the camera. He was here for the discussion, not the performance. Kimmel brought up Tom's new film again, the drama about a man returning to his hometown after years away, only to find that everything he believed in was gone. Kimmel gently steered toward the theme, a story of loss, forgiveness, new beginnings, and carefully asked, in a society changing so fast, isn't it time to let go of old images of courage and strength? Tom was silent for a few seconds. His face remained open, but something shifted in his eyes. He said simply, "Strength isn't an image, it's a choice, every day." The words landed as if he were speaking them to himself, not the audience. No posturing, no playing the hero, just a statement of fact. The room grew quiet. Even the cameras seemed to slow, as if capturing every millimeter of the moment. Kimmel, trying to restore levity, joked that sometimes the choice is just to smile for the crowd. A faint chuckle rippled through the audience, but quickly died when Cruise didn't smile back. Kimmel changed tack, bringing up a scene in the film where Tom's character refuses to fight, choosing to walk away. The host cautiously asked, "Was that a hint that the era of strong, silent men is over?" Tom turned his head and answered calmly, "Sometimes strength is knowing when not to waste yourself." His voice didn't rise. He wasn't arguing. He was explaining, like a man who knows his subject too well. Kimmel tried to smile, joking that in Hollywood, you can't always avoid a fight. Sometimes you have to jump in for a good shot. The audience gave a short laugh, but their eyes weren't on Kimmel. They were on Tom. He didn't waver. He held the pause, as if more was said in the silence than in any line. Kimmel tried another angle. He gently brought up the idea that modern society encourages men to be more open, emotional, to talk about their feelings. Did Tom think that movement was right? Tom looked straight at him. "Openness isn't about saying everything," he said slowly, without force. "Openness is knowing what you feel, and understanding when to say it and when not to." Someone in the audience nodded. Someone else looked away. Kimmel, sensing the conversation slipping from his grasp, tried to shift gears. He brought up a scene where Tom's character is alone in an empty house, too late to say important words to his father. "Sometimes silence is a mistake," he suggested. "Maybe we need to learn to speak in time." Tom answered without hesitation. "The mistake is thinking words can fix what you couldn't fix with actions." The silence in the room grew dense. The cameras caught every movement. Someone nervously fidgeting with an armrest, someone clutching their phone. Kimmel made one more attempt to pull the show back to its usual rhythm. With a smile, he said that after such heavy talk, they could all use a bar with free drinks. A light laugh passed through the rows, but Tom didn't play along. He just sat. And in that silence, there was more power than in any rousing speech. Realizing his usual tactics weren't working, Kimmel asked a final question. Did Tom feel that his roles in films were an attempt to hold on to an old world that's slipping away? Tom paused for a moment. No, he said. It's an attempt to remind people that you don't have to change just because expectations around you have. The words were quiet, but hit with the force of a blow, and the audience felt it. Someone started clapping, not loudly, but firmly. Someone else stayed seated, hands clasped. Kimmel knew the moment was lost. He smiled, automatically, like a machine, thanked Tom for the interview, joked that evenings this intense would stick with him for a long time, and called for the next commercial break. Tom Cruise remained in his chair. He didn't stand, didn't say goodbye, just sat, like a man who hadn't come for the show. But to say what he felt needed saying, even if that meant saying nothing at all. The studio transitioned to the commercial breaks music, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. When the studio came back on air after the break, the air felt different. Not just thick, but heavy, like before a storm. No one was pretending anymore, not in the audience, not on stage. Everyone felt the usual rhythm of the show had been shattered, as if the thread holding the illusion of lightness had quietly snapped. Kimmel started speaking. His voice was slightly louder than usual, as if trying to drown out not the crowd's noise, but the silence that filled everything. He thanked Tom for his deep thoughts and suggested moving to something lighter, a story from the set, something funny, something cute for the audience. Tom sat calmly. He nodded, as if agreeing. But his face showed no readiness to entertain. He was simply waiting. Kimmel told an anecdote about how Tom jumped off a bridge without a harness on the new film's set, terrifying the crew. Laughter came, but it was strange. Some laughed with relief, others out of inertia. Tom finally spoke. His voice was even. Fear is normal. Living in fear isn't. The words sounded ordinary, but in the studio, they detonated like an explosion. Kimmel found himself at a loss for a response. Everything he'd prepared seemed childish next to this weight. The audience froze. Some looked at Tom, others at the host, waiting to see who would crack first. Kimmel, with a strained smile, moved to the next topic: celebrities' social responsibility. How stars are now expected to do more. Not just make films, but take stands, comment, be active citizens. Did Tom think actors should use their platform to make the world better? Tom looked at him, his gaze almost posing a counter-question. Do you even believe that? But aloud, he said something else. A platform isn't a stage. It's a responsibility. Speaking for likes is a betrayal of those who actually listen. Some in the audience nodded approvingly. Others rolled their eyes. Kimmel quickly tried to lighten the mood, joking that if he were a superstar, he'd demand a separate room just for his shoes. A brief laugh passed through the room, but it was short-lived, like a spark that didn't catch fire. Tom didn't laugh. He just looked at Kimmel. Calmly. In that look was an understanding. The game was over. Kimmel tried to regain control. He asked about a scene in the film where Tom's character stands alone in a ruined city. A wordless scene, just wind and the distant clink of glass. Was it a symbol of losing old values or embracing the new? Tom answered immediately. It's a scene about how sometimes, to build something new, you have to endure loneliness first. His words lingered in the air longer than a live broadcast allows. Kimmel visibly tensed. He knew. The longer Tom spoke, the more control slipped away, and the harder it would be to bring the format back. A murmur passed through the audience. Some tried to clap, others shushed them with an irritated shh. The host sped up. He pivoted to a safe topic: charity, projects for kids. An easy question. How does Tom choose who to help? Tom tilted his head slightly, as if weighing the answer. I help those who can't tell their story themselves, and I never ask for thanks. The words sounded like a challenge again, a refusal to play the storytelling star script. Kimmel realized he was losing the pace. He tried humor again, brought up some funny rumors from the Mission Impossible set, how Tom supposedly insisted on a real underwater scene with no stunt double, with 6 people ensuring him. Tom nodded, smiled, but it was a brief, almost imperceptible smile. When you know you might drown, he said, you start to understand that every word can drown you too. That line stopped the room again. Kimmel glanced at the producers behind the cameras. They were gesturing nervously. 2 minutes left. Something had to change, fast. He went all in. Tom, Kimmel said, do you believe men today even understand who they're supposed to be? Or are we all just lost? The question was dangerous. He threw it out blindly, hoping crews would either laugh or fall into a cliché. But Tom didn't laugh. He looked at Kimmel, then turned his gaze to the audience, and said, a man doesn't have to be someone new every time fashion changes. A man is someone who stays himself when everyone else demands he become different. The silence hit the studio like thunder. Someone on the balcony whispered, wow. The camera trembled for a split second. A security guard in the audience took a step toward the stage, but then stopped. Kimmel tried to smile, but his face hardened. He knew. Everything had spiraled out of control. When the show returned from the next commercial break, the studio felt transformed. No longer a TV set, it was an arena. The people were seated, but they were no longer spectators. They were witnesses. And no one knew how this would end. Kimmel took his place behind the desk, but the ease was gone from his movements. His smile was a gesture, like a man putting on a mask too late. He tried to quickly rebuild the show's structure, asked Tom a routine question about the upcoming release of his new film, hoping the conversation would slide back into familiar territory. But Tom was silent. The pause stretched, long enough for the studio cameras to start zooming in on the audience, hoping to catch some reaction. And then Kimmel took another risk. He played to the crowd, said that sometimes Hollywood veterans become hostages to their old images. Maybe it was time for a new kind of hero, not invincible, not unyielding, but ordinary, vulnerable. Some in the audience nodded approvingly, but Tom finally spoke. Vulnerability isn't a pose, he said quietly. It's something you carry inside, and if you display it for applause, it's no longer strength. It's trading your pain. The audience tensed. Some clapped. Others turned away. Kimmel nodded, as if agreeing. But a spark of irritation flashed in his eyes. He picked up a cue card and asked the next question without preparation. What about the old school, Tom? Isn't it time to admit the world has changed? That old principles are no longer needed? The silence after that question was as thick as in a bunker. Tom looked at him and said, principles don't age. People just get scared to follow them when it's inconvenient. At that moment, something strange happened. The audience split. Half stood and applauded. The other half stayed seated, arms crossed. The cameras darted frantically across the crowd's faces. Producers backstage shouted into headsets, "Keep the wide shot! Don't show too much chaos!" Kimmel felt the stage slipping out from under him, but he held on. He went all in, stood up from his chair, and said that maybe this was all just a game of heroes, that in reality, Tom and all the old Hollywood heroes were just pretty fairy tales. That, in real life, those principles lost long ago. The audience erupted in shouts. Tom stood, not quickly, not threateningly, but in that simplicity was more power than any storm. He walked to the edge of the stage, paused for a moment. "Pretty fairy tales," he said to the audience. "That's when they offer you an easy path and call it progress. But progress isn't when you forget everything. It's when you carry the heavy load and don't drop it." The room exploded. People shouted, whistled, some recorded on their phones. Others argued in the aisles. Security guards appeared in the corners, polite but ready for anything. Kimmel tried to say something into the mic, but he was barely audible over the noise. Tom stood still. He didn't threaten, didn't accuse. He simply was, like a boulder in a stream that the water vainly tried to flow around. And then Kimmel, almost shouting, announced that the show would go on, that the next segment would be lighter, that this was interesting, yes, of course, but they had a schedule to stick to. Tom looked at him and said nothing. That silence was worse than any words. It hit harder than any accusation. Backstage, producers scrambled, debating how to cut the broadcast. Studio lights flickered, overheating from the tension in the air. Assistants rushed to security, exchanging clipped phrases. Kimmel looked into the camera, forced a smile, and told the viewers, "There's plenty more to come. Stay with us." But everyone knew. The interesting part had already happened, and nothing that followed could erase what had just taken place. Tom stood as the audience roared, and no one knew how this night would end, or what it was only beginning. When the show ended, the tension in the room lingered. People rose slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might bring the storm back. Some shouted, "Bravo!" Others hurried out of the studio, as if escaping something they weren't supposed to witness. Backstage was chaos. Producers conferred on the fly. Assistants whispered into headsets, debating what could be cut in editing. One security guard tried to convince another that they should have stopped recording 20 minutes before the end. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment, though the director shouted into his mic, "Cut the wide shot! Cut it!" Tom didn't rush to leave. He stood at the edge of the stage, apart from the frenzy, as if he no longer belonged to this studio, this time, these rules. His gaze was fixed somewhere higher, where the spotlights turned into blinding beams in the void. His face remained as calm as when he first sat across from Kimmel. While the studio scrambled to contain the damage, the real storm was already brewing outside. Clips from the broadcast hit the internet before the show even officially ended. Headlines popped up faster than you could read them. Tom Cruise blows up Jimmy Kimmel. Live. Cruise dismantles show format live on air. Scandal of the year. Tom Cruise versus Hollywood. Each new post fueled the fire. Some wrote that Tom showed courage. Others accused him of disrespect. Arguments erupted under every video. Discussions flooded every platform, from YouTube to Twitter, from news sites to fan pages. The show Kimmel had so carefully built for years was now cracking under the weight of public resonance. His team hurriedly issued a statement, short, measured. "We respect every guest's opinion and always welcome open discussions. Sometimes the show takes an unexpected turn, and that's okay." But the audience wasn't buying explanations. They wanted emotion. They wanted to pick a side, and they did. Videos of Tom's remarks went viral. Millions of views in the first hours. Memes, quotes, heated debates in the comments. Some called him a hero who said what others feared to. Others labeled him an old man unable to accept new times. But there were no indifferent onlookers. Even those who never watch talk shows were now discussing what happened in Kimmel's studio that night. Tom left without fanfare. No security, no entourage. He slipped out through a side door where an old black SUV waited. A few photographers tried to catch a shot, but he didn't linger. Got in the car, shut the door, and vanished into the night, as if leaving all the noise behind. Inside the studio, the scorched remnants of a show that couldn't handle the raw force of unfiltered truth remained. Journalists scrambled to invite Tom for interviews, demanding comments. He stayed silent, issued no statements. His silence spoke louder than any press conference. It only poured fuel on the fire. Because in that silence was certainty. He'd said all he wanted to. He didn't need to explain or justify. The next morning, rival talk shows discussed only one thing: Tom Cruise's appearance. Clips were replayed endlessly, close-ups of his face, Kimmel's hesitant glances, applause morphing into a hum of arguments. Even evening news broadcasts led with the story. In the network's offices, emergency meetings were held. Producers debated whether to cut the conflict from reruns. Managers scrambled to save advertising contracts. PR teams churned out press releases. But it was too late. The event had spiraled beyond their control. Tom's film, which he'd come to promote, suddenly saw a surge of interest. Tickets for the premiere sold out. People discussed not just the movie, but the man himself, his stance, his words, his resolve. For many, he became a symbol of something bigger than cinema. Kimmel, meanwhile, faced a brutal wave of criticism. He was accused of provoking the conflict, of failing to handle the situation, of trying to humiliate his guest, but humiliating himself instead. His ratings spiked, but not from audience love, from scandal, from blood on the floor. In the end, Tom said nothing, gave no interviews, didn't apologize, didn't explain. He simply left, and left everyone else to decide what this was: the fall of an old world or its last great rebellion. If you watch this moment on YouTube, drop a comment below. Whose side are you on? Tom Cruise, who refused to play by the script for the sake of truth, or Jimmy Kimmel, who tried to keep order but was outmatched by reality? What's closer to you? Raw truth that shatters comfortable rules, or a show that maintains the illusion of peace but hides the essence? Write it. We're curious. What will you choose?